I hope you're ready, because the energy surrounding this reading feels impossible to ignore. This doesn't feel like a passing thought or a temporary emotion. It feels like someone has been trying to walk away from what they feel, only to realize they keep finding their way back to the same person. There is a powerful shift happening here, a moment of truth, a moment where someone may be questioning everything they thought they wanted, because their heart keeps leading them in one direction. So today, we're going to take a closer look at what's changing inside this connection and why this energy may be showing up for you right now. Welcome in, my beautiful Sagittarius friends. I'm so grateful you're here. My name is Henry, and let's see what the cards want to reveal as we step into this reading together. Okay, the moment I begin pulling into this energy, I can already feel someone trying very hard to convince themselves that they were doing the right thing by creating distance. You know when a person keeps telling themselves, this is for the best, over and over again because they're hoping that if they repeat it enough times, they'll finally believe it? That's what this feels like. The first card catching my attention is the moon, and honestly, there is something about this energy that feels deeply unfinished. Not because anyone necessarily wanted things to remain open-ended, but because somebody left carrying questions they never fully answered for themselves. I keep seeing a person trying to move forward with their life, trying to focus on work, trying to focus on responsibilities, trying to focus on what was directly in front of them, yet somehow, your energy keeps showing up in unexpected moments. Maybe it's a song, maybe it's a place, maybe it's a random memory they thought they had forgotten. And suddenly, there you are again. The strange thing is that they may have genuinely believed distance would make things easier. They thought stepping away would quiet their emotions. They thought time would create clarity. But what I'm feeling is that time actually created the opposite, because the further they walked, the more noticeable your absence became. Wow, that's a very specific feeling. It's almost like they didn't realize how much space you occupied in their heart until you weren't standing there anymore. I'm also picking up someone who spent a long time avoiding what they truly felt. Not because they didn't care, quite the opposite. I think caring became the problem. Sometimes emotions become so intense that a person starts looking for an exit instead of leaning in. And I feel like this individual may have done exactly that. They told themselves they needed freedom. They told themselves they needed time. They told themselves they needed to focus elsewhere. But the moon keeps appearing here like a reminder that some feelings refuse to stay buried. And now those feelings are beginning to rise back to the surface. The next card sliding into this reading is the Five of Cups. Okay, this is where things become emotional, because I'm feeling regret here. Not dramatic regret, not performative regret. The kind of regret that arrives quietly. The kind that shows up when nobody else is around. The kind that appears during ordinary moments when a person suddenly realizes what they lost. I don't think this person expected to miss you the way they do. Honestly, I don't. I think they assumed life would continue exactly as it had before. But instead, there seems to be this growing awareness that something important left with you. Something meaningful. Something real. And now they're looking back. Not necessarily because everything was perfect, but because they're beginning to understand the value of what was standing in front of them. You know, sometimes people don't fully recognize a connection while they're inside it. Sometimes understanding arrives later. Sometimes perspective arrives later. And that's exactly what this feels like. I keep hearing someone asking themselves questions they never asked before. Why did I leave? Why did I pull away? Why was I so afraid? Why does this still matter to me? And the more they ask those questions, the harder it becomes to pretend they don't care. Then we have judgment appearing, and wow, this energy feels powerful, because something is waking up here. Something is shifting inside this person's perspective. The version of them that once believed walking away was the answer may no longer see things the same way. It's like they're revisiting old decisions, revisiting old conversations, revisiting moments they thought were over. And every road somehow leads back to the same place. Back to you. Back to this connection. Back to feelings they thought would disappear. There is a realization happening. A realization that your presence affected them more deeply than they originally understood. A realization that not every connection can be replaced simply because distance exists. A realization that some people continue living inside your heart long after they leave the room. And honestly, I don't think this realization is giving them much peace, because now the Nine of Swords is coming through. This card feels restless, sleepless, heavy, like somebody whose mind refuses to slow down. I keep getting the feeling that you've been crossing their thoughts far more often than they would ever admit. They replay conversations. They replay decisions. They replay moments where they could have said something different. done something different, chosen something different, and every replay seems to bring them back to the same uncomfortable truth. Walking away did not help them forget you. If anything, it forced them to confront how much you actually meant. You know what's interesting? This doesn't feel like someone who has all the answers. It feels like someone who is finally allowing themselves to ask the right questions. And sometimes that's where every real change begins. Not with certainty, not with confidence, but with honesty. The kind of honesty that arrives when a person can no longer outrun what their heart has been trying to tell them all along. Something else is coming through here, and honestly, it feels like a wall that has been standing for a very long time is beginning to crack. Not all at once, not dramatically, just enough for a little light to get through. I keep seeing someone who spent months, maybe even longer, trying to explain this connection away, trying to find a logical reason for why it affected them so deeply. They wanted facts. They wanted certainty. They wanted something they could measure and control. Yet every explanation they came up with seemed incomplete. Every answer created another question, and that's where the Seven of Cups starts appearing. What fascinates me about this energy is that it doesn't feel like confusion anymore. It feels like someone realizing they were confused. There's a difference, because when you're inside an illusion, you don't know you're inside one. You think you're seeing everything clearly. This person may have spent a long time convincing themselves that there were other options that made more sense, other paths, other priorities, other people, other goals, other reasons to move on. And for a while, those things may have looked convincing. You know, sometimes a person chooses what feels safe instead of what feels real. Sometimes they choose what is expected instead of what is meaningful. Sometimes they listen to voices around them because those voices seem more reasonable than the voice inside their own heart. Wow! That feels important because I keep hearing outside opinions, family, friends, people who thought they knew what was best, people who had their own perspectives, people who may have looked at this connection from the outside and offered advice that sounded practical. And maybe this person listened. Maybe they trusted those opinions. Maybe they allowed those voices to become louder than their own intuition. Yet something happened. Time passed, life continued, and those outside voices slowly became quieter, while the feeling they had for you somehow remained. The star is appearing here, and honestly, the energy shifts the moment it does. Everything suddenly feels softer, more honest, less defensive. I don't feel someone running anymore. I feel someone reflecting, someone sitting alone with their thoughts, someone replaying memories that once seemed insignificant, but now carry a completely different meaning. It's almost like they're seeing certain moments for the first time, the way you looked at them, the way you listened, the way you understood things they never explained, the way they felt around you without even realizing it. You know what's interesting? I don't think this person expected your absence to teach them anything. Yet your absence may have become one of their greatest teachers. Because without you standing there, there was nothing left to distract them from themselves, nothing left to hide behind, no excuses, no avoidance, no convenient explanations, just them, their choices, their fears, and the truth they kept trying not to look at. Okay, the cards are becoming very clear here. The magician is showing itself, and I immediately get the feeling that this person is beginning to understand the role they played in this story. For a long time, they may have focused on circumstances, focused on timing, focused on distance, focused on obstacles, focused on everything outside themselves. But this feels different. This feels like accountability, not self-punishment, not guilt, just awareness. A growing awareness that some of the barriers they blamed on the world may have actually been created by fear. Fear of being vulnerable, fear of being seen, fear of wanting something so deeply that losing it would hurt. Because let's be honest, real feelings can be terrifying, especially for someone who's used to staying in control, especially for someone who believes they should always have the answers. This person strikes me as someone who wanted certainty before they allowed themselves to fully invest emotionally. The problem is that love rarely works that way. Human connection rarely works that way. And I think they're beginning to understand that. I keep hearing someone say, "What if I was looking at this all wrong?" Wow, that question changes everything. Because once a person asks that question, the old story starts falling apart. The old assumptions start falling apart. The old fears start losing power. And that's exactly why the Ace of Swords feels so significant in this reading. It's almost like a fog lifting. Not because every answer suddenly appears, not because everything becomes simple overnight, but because somebody is finally willing to be honest with themselves. I feel like they've spent a very long time trying to outthink their emotions, trying to analyze them, trying to manage them, trying to organize them into neat little categories that make sense. Yet the truth keeps slipping through. The truth keeps finding its way back, and the truth is surprisingly simple. You matter more to them than they expected. You affected them more than they admitted. You stayed with them longer than they planned, and no amount of logic has been able to erase that.
Honestly,
I think that's what they're struggling with the most, not the feeling itself. The fact that the feeling survived every attempt to dismiss it, every attempt to replace it, every attempt to ignore it. Because somewhere inside this person, a new perspective is beginning to form. A perspective that no longer asks how to forget. A perspective that no longer asks how to escape. A perspective that is quietly, cautiously beginning to ask a completely different question. What if this connection was worth understanding instead of avoiding? There's a very different feeling entering the reading here. The energy feels quieter, more deliberate, less focused on what was lost and more focused on what no longer belongs. And honestly, that shift feels significant. Because I don't think this person could have reached this place without everything they've been processing internally. The Eight of Cups is appearing, and what I'm noticing immediately is that this doesn't feel impulsive. It doesn't feel like someone storming out of a room or making a dramatic decision in the heat of the moment. It feels like someone standing still for a very long time before finally admitting that they've outgrown something. You know, there are situations people stay in because they're familiar. There are relationships people stay in because they're comfortable. There are versions of themselves they continue carrying because they're afraid of who they might become without them. And this person feels like they've been standing at that crossroads. I keep seeing somebody looking around at different areas of their life and asking themselves a question they've never seriously asked before. Does this still belong in my future? Wow, that feels powerful. Because once that question appears, everything starts changing. People start changing. Priorities start changing. Goals start changing. What once seemed important begins losing its hold. What once felt necessary begins feeling heavy. And I feel like this person is becoming aware of how much energy they've been investing into things that no longer align with who they're becoming. It's almost like they're cleaning out emotional closets, letting go of old stories, letting go of old disappointments, letting go of expectations that were never truly theirs to begin with. The interesting thing is that I don't think they expected you to remain part of this process. Yet somehow you do. As they remove certain things from their life, your presence becomes clearer instead of fading. That's what keeps standing out to me. Okay, the Death card is here. And honestly, whenever this energy enters a reading like this, I pay attention. Because something is ending. Not in a frightening way, not in a catastrophic way, in a necessary way. I keep getting the feeling that this person is shedding an older version of themselves. A version that operated from fear. A version that believed emotional distance was strength. A version that thought avoiding vulnerability would somehow protect them. That version seems exhausted. And maybe that's because it has carried the weight of too many unfinished emotions for too long. You know, growth can be uncomfortable. Especially when it requires a person to admit they were wrong about something. Especially when it requires them to acknowledge that certain choices were made from fear instead of wisdom. And I think that's part of what's happening here. They're beginning to see themselves differently. They're beginning to understand that some of the walls they built weren't protecting them. They were isolating them. They weren't creating freedom. They were creating loneliness. And that's a difficult realization for anyone to face. I keep hearing the words, I don't want to keep living the same story. Wow, that feels incredibly honest. Because this person may have repeated certain patterns throughout their life. Maybe running when things became serious. Maybe keeping one foot out the door. Maybe convincing themselves they didn't need anyone. Maybe choosing situations that felt predictable instead of meaningful. Yet something about this connection seems to have interrupted that pattern. Something about you challenged it, not through pressure, not through force, just through your presence. The Six of Swords is sliding into the reading, and suddenly everything feels calmer. There's less resistance here. Less internal fighting, more acceptance. I almost see someone standing off on a shoreline, looking back at where they've been, recognizing that they can't stay there anymore. Not because the past was entirely bad, not because every memory needs to be erased, simply because they've learned what they needed to learn. And staying would only delay the next chapter. That's what this feels like. A gradual movement forward. A conscious decision to stop carrying certain burdens. A willingness to leave behind situations that drain more than they give. Honestly, I think this person has spent so much time trying to figure out what they should do that they forgot to ask themselves what genuinely makes them happy. And happiness feels surprisingly simple here. Not extravagant, not complicated, not impossible to reach. Just simple, authentic, real. I keep getting images of everyday moments. Conversations, laughter, feeling understood, feeling accepted, feeling seen. Those things seem more valuable to them than they once did. The hermit appears, and immediately I feel this deep sense of reflection. This isn't somebody blindly rushing toward the future. This is somebody carefully examining everything they've experienced. Looking at lessons, looking at mistakes, looking at missed opportunities, looking at growth. There is maturity in this energy. A willingness to sit alone with uncomfortable truths instead of running from them. And honestly, that's not easy. Many people spend their entire lives avoiding that level of self-examination. Yet this person seems to be doing exactly that. I keep seeing them revisiting certain moments involving you. Not from a place of obsession, from a place of understanding. Trying to understand why your impact remained when so many other things faded. Trying to understand why thoughts of you continued showing up during periods when they were focused on completely different things. Trying to understand why, after all this time and all these experiences, their heart still pauses when your energy enters their mind. And the answer may not be arriving all at once. It feels slower than that, more organic. Like sunrise gradually illuminating a landscape that was hidden during the night. What I do know is that this person no longer seems interested in carrying what no longer serves them. They're becoming selective about what deserves space in their life. Selective about where their energy goes. Selective about what they choose to build moving forward. And for reasons they may still be trying to fully understand, your energy continues to remain among the things they are not ready to leave behind. There's a feeling building here that reminds me of someone standing outside a door they've walked past 100 times, knowing they need to knock, knowing they need to say something, yet still gathering the courage to reach for the handle. The energy becomes very different the moment the Page of Cups appears. It feels softer, more vulnerable, less concerned with protecting an image and more concerned with expressing something real. And honestly, that's not easy for this person. I don't get the sense that they're naturally comfortable wearing their heart on their sleeve. If anything, they seem like somebody who prefers to process everything internally before revealing even a fraction of what they're feeling. Yet the longer they've sat with these emotions, the harder it has become to keep them locked away. You know what keeps coming through? Unfinished conversations. Not necessarily arguments, not necessarily dramatic endings, just things left unsaid, thoughts they never shared, feelings they never admitted, questions they never asked. I keep seeing someone replaying a conversation in their head before it even happens. Thinking about what they would say if they had the opportunity. Thinking about how they would explain themselves. Thinking about how they would tell you what was actually going on beneath the surface all this time. Wow. This feels incredibly human. Because sometimes people don't stay silent because they don't care. Sometimes they stay silent because they care so much that they're terrified of saying the wrong thing. And this person feels caught somewhere inside that space. Part of them wants to reach out immediately. Part of them keeps hesitating. Part of them wants certainty before taking a risk. Yet another part of them is beginning to understand that certainty may never arrive first. The Knight of Cups is stepping into the reading, and I immediately feel movement. Not rushed movement, not impulsive movement, intentional movement. The kind that happens after someone spends a very long time thinking, a very long time questioning, a very long time trying to understand their own heart. What stands out is that this person no longer seems interested in pretending they don't feel what they feel. They're tired, not physically, emotionally tired. Tired of carrying conversations in their imagination. Tired of wondering what could happen. Tired of creating scenarios inside their mind instead of participating in real life. I keep getting the image of someone writing a message and deleting it. Writing it again, changing a word, changing another word, looking at the screen, putting the phone down, picking it back up. Honestly, some of you would laugh if you knew how much time this person has spent thinking about reaching out. Because what looks like silence from the outside may actually be a tremendous amount of internal activity. They've thought about seeing you. They've thought about hearing your voice. They've thought about how they would react if you smiled at them again. They've thought about whether enough time has passed. They've thought about whether you would even want to hear from them. And that last question feels important. Because underneath everything else, I keep feeling vulnerability. What if you don't feel the same? What if you've moved on? What if the opportunity is gone? What if they waited too long? Those fears seem to be sitting quietly beneath the surface. Yet something stronger is beginning to emerge. The Eight of Wands appears, and wow, the energy suddenly speeds up. It's almost like a pressure valve being released. I keep feeling someone reaching a point where overthinking no longer feels sustainable. A point where holding everything inside becomes more uncomfortable than expressing it. You know, There comes a moment when a person realizes that no amount of preparation is going to remove every risk. No amount of planning is going to guarantee the perfect outcome. No amount of waiting is going to answer questions that only action can answer. And I feel this person approaching that realization, not because someone is forcing them, not because circumstances are demanding it, because their own heart is becoming harder to ignore. I keep hearing, I need to know, not know the future, not know every answer. Just know whether this connection still exists in the way they feel it does. That's why communication feels so important here, not grand gestures, not dramatic declarations. Communication, honesty, authenticity, the willingness to speak from a place they may have avoided for a very long time. Okay, the Ace of Cups is here, and the atmosphere changes again. Everything feels open, fresh, unfiltered. There's something beautiful about this energy because it doesn't feel driven by ego anymore. It feels driven by sincerity. I don't think this person is looking for a perfect script. I don't think they're looking for a flawless performance. I think they're reaching a point where they simply want to be understood. They want the opportunity to show you something they haven't fully shown before. The emotional truth they've been carrying, the feelings they've been sorting through, the perspective they've gained, the things they wish they had said sooner. And honestly, I don't think this is only about romance. I think it's about emotional honesty. Because some of the strongest connections in our lives are built during moments when people stop performing and start telling the truth. This person feels closer to that place than they've ever been. I keep seeing somebody standing on the edge of a conversation they've imagined countless times. A conversation that isn't really about fixing the past. It's about finally allowing the truth to exist in the open instead of carrying it alone. And the more they sit with that truth, the less interested they become in hiding from it. There's something remarkably clear coming through this energy. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear. The kind of clarity that arrives after a person has spent a very long time searching everywhere, except the place where the answer was waiting. The lovers appears, and the atmosphere shifts immediately. I don't feel someone comparing options anymore. I don't feel someone standing at a crossroads wondering which direction to take. I feel someone beginning to understand what truly matters to them. And honestly, that realization seems to have taken longer than they expected. You know, life has a strange way of teaching people through contrast. Sometimes a person has to experience what doesn't fit before they recognize what does. Sometimes they have to spend time chasing things they thought they wanted before discovering what actually brings meaning into their life. And that's what this feels like. This person may have explored different paths, different priorities, different goals, different versions of happiness. Yet somehow they kept arriving at the same conclusion, not because everything else was wrong, because something about this connection continued to stand apart from everything else. I keep seeing someone quietly admitting that to themselves, not announcing it, not saying it out loud, just sitting with the truth, and that truth seems to be changing them. Wow! There is a maturity here that wasn't present earlier in the reading. A willingness to stop asking, what do I have to gain? And start asking, what do I genuinely value? Those are very different questions. One comes from desire, the other comes from wisdom. And this person feels like they're moving toward wisdom. The Four of Wands is appearing, and suddenly I get this overwhelming feeling of stability. Not perfection, not fantasy, stability. Something solid, something real, something worth building. I don't think they're looking at this connection through the same lens anymore. For a long time, they may have focused on uncertainty, focused on risks, focused on what could go wrong. Yet what I'm feeling now is somebody imagining what could actually go right. That's a huge shift, because when a person's mindset changes, everything changes with it. I keep seeing them thinking about ordinary things, shared experiences, creating memories, showing up consistently, being present, building trust, building something meaningful over time. Honestly, that's what makes this energy feel so different from simple attraction. This isn't only about excitement. This feels like somebody recognizing the value of emotional safety, the value of knowing who they're coming home to, the value of having someone who understands them beyond appearances. And what surprises them most may be the fact that they're no longer afraid of wanting those things. At one point, they may have viewed commitment as a limitation, viewed closeness as something that threatened their independence, viewed emotional investment as a risk they weren't prepared to take. Those beliefs seem to be changing, slowly, naturally, through experience, through growth, through everything they've learned since stepping away from what once felt familiar. Okay, the Ten of Cups is here, and this card carries such a different energy from the beginning of this reading. The beginning felt uncertain, heavy, conflicted. This feels open-hearted. I keep getting the sense that this person is beginning to understand happiness differently than they used to. not through achievements, not through status, not through proving something to the world, through connection, through authenticity, through sharing life with someone who feels meaningful. You know what's standing out? They're no longer looking for a perfect person. They're no longer looking for a flawless situation. They're looking for something genuine, something that feels alive, something that continues to matter even after time passes. And when they think about those qualities, your energy keeps appearing, not because they're forcing it, not because they're trying to convince themselves, because that's where their thoughts naturally go. I keep hearing this internal realization. Maybe I've been searching for things that were never as important as I thought. Wow, that feels emotional, because growth often involves discovering that what we needed wasn't what we spent years pursuing. This person seems to be learning that lesson. The Ten of Pentacles arrives, and honestly, this feels like the final piece of understanding falling into place. Not understanding about you, understanding about themselves, understanding about what they want their life to look like moving forward, what kind of relationships they want, what kind of future they want, what kind of legacy they want to create. I don't think they're interested in temporary distractions anymore. I don't think they're interested in connections that only exist on the surface. Something inside them is craving depth, consistency, meaning, and that's where this reading becomes incredibly powerful. Because the person who once believed distance was the answer now seems to be asking a completely different question. Not how far they can go, not how much freedom they can create, not how effectively they can protect themselves. They're asking where they genuinely belong. They're asking who continues to matter after the noise settles. They're asking what remains important after all the distractions have been stripped away. And every time those questions appear, your energy seems to remain standing, not as an unfinished chapter, not as a passing memory, not as something they need to escape, as something they want to understand more deeply, as something they want to value more consciously, as something they no longer wish to overlook. Because after all the questioning, all the hesitation, all the searching, and all the growth, the feeling I'm getting is that their heart is becoming less interested in endless possibilities and more interested in one meaningful choice that continues to feel real no matter how many times they try to walk away from it. You know, as I sit with this energy, what stands out to me the most isn't the uncertainty we've been talking about, it's the growth. Because sometimes people believe a connection is about finding the right person, but many times, it's also about becoming the version of yourself that can finally recognize what truly matters. And that's what this feels like. It feels like someone who has spent a long time searching, questioning, resisting, and trying to understand their own heart. Not because they wanted to make things complicated, but because some lessons simply take time to fully sink in. What I'm seeing here is a person who is no longer looking at life through the same eyes they once had. Their priorities are changing. Their perspective is changing, and the things they once thought were important may not hold the same value they used to. Whether this energy resonates as someone from your past or someone currently finding their way through their own emotional journey, there is a strong sense that certain truths can only be discovered through experience. And sometimes those truths arrive quietly, not through grand moments, not through dramatic revelations, just through a growing awareness that some people leave a lasting imprint on our lives. So take what resonates, leave what doesn't, and trust your own intuition above everything else. That's all I've got for you for this reading. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate it. You all mean a lot, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care. Okay. Bye-bye.